Hello, welcome. Thank you for joining our philosophy portion of today's event. My name is Molly. I'm a recruitment coordinator with Carleton. We're really happy to have everyone here. So just want to start off our session by recognizing that Carleton and most of our staff and employees are located on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Nation, building a strong relationship between the people that originally inhabited this beautiful land that we're able to call our campus now is a really important part of how Carleton is approaching reconciliation and moving forward. So thank you all again for joining us. If you have any questions, please leave them in the Q&A function. We will be monitoring Q&A, not chat, so please make sure that they are posted in Q&A. Enjoy.
Hi, everybody. My name is Professor Frankel. I'm the undergraduate supervisor in the philosophy department, and I'm also one of the professors in the department. And I have a little presentation to go through with you, but also you should know from the get-go that I'm not super technologically advanced. So hopefully we won't have any trouble with the presentation. And anytime you have any questions or want to interrupt me and discuss, please feel free to do so. The plan for this presentation is to talk about three things. So the first thing I want to talk about is what philosophy even is. Some of you who are attending this presentation or maybe watching this presentation later, maybe you've taken a philosophy class. I know that some high schools do teach philosophy, but maybe you haven't. Not all high schools do, and in fact, most high schools don't. So you might not have any idea what philosophy is and just be thinking to yourself, hey, what happens in a philosophy department? What kinds of classes would I take? What's the Carleton philosophy department like? So I'll start by talking a little bit about what philosophy is, what kinds of questions we ask in philosophy departments, and then a little bit specifically about the Carleton philosophy department, who we are, what kinds of things we do, what kinds of classes we offer. Whether you're thinking about doing a major in philosophy or a minor or just doing some electives, we have a ton of students who just take electives in philosophy because they think it would be valuable to them for various reasons that we can talk about as I'm going through. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about is if you did want to take a degree in philosophy, what you could do with a degree in philosophy, and specifically what some of the folks coming out of Carleton's philosophy department have done with their degrees in philosophy. So that's my plan for this presentation, but let me just mention one more time that if at any point you have questions about what I'm saying or about anything else, please do feel free to ask. And also, I think there will be a Q&A session at the end if you want to hold your questions to then, but you don't have to hold your questions. Okay, so let's start with this word philosophy. Actually, let me ask you a question because I think there are a couple of you here. Does anybody here know what that means, philosophy? What the word itself means? You want to throw some answers up? Or would you just like me to say? All right, I see nobody is brave enough to put a question or an answer in the chat. That's totally fine. Oh, the perspective of oneself. Oh, that's a really nice beginning of an answer. I like that a lot. Does anybody else have a thought? So the actual word philosophy comes from Greek, actually. I don't know if any of you have any Greek language. It comes from these two words, philo and actually Sophia. And you've probably heard the word philo attached to lots of other things, but it basically means love. Hi to everybody who's saying hello in the chat. And Sophia means something like knowledge or wisdom. And we have a Sophia here, which is terrific. So it's a beautiful name. So philosophy is something like the love of wisdom or the love of knowledge or the pursuit of knowledge, which has a lot to do, as Mark said earlier, with the perspective of oneself. Well, we'll talk about that. So the love of knowledge or the love of wisdom or the pursuit of wisdom. But sometimes when I'm telling this to people, they think it's a little bit funny because every field in the university pursues wisdom. So what is it about philosophy in particular that makes it different from the other disciplines? That's a kind of question that we often ask. And what some people think is that what distinguishes philosophy is a kind of history. So when some people think about philosophy, they're thinking about a set of views that people held historically. So maybe you've heard of some of these folks that I'm talking about, Plato and Descartes, or you may have heard of Spinoza or of Aristotle. These are all philosophers. They all had particular views. They had important views about life, about how to live one's life, about oneself, right? And about lots of other things as well. But so maybe you think, you know, it's just a set of views that people held historically. Or some people think about philosophy as a set of questions, like questions about what makes our lives meaningful. Actually, I should say that at Carleton, we have a course that we offer, a first year course, so one that all first year students are eligible to take, called The Meaning of Life. And it's a terrific course. But so some of the questions that philosophers might ask would be questions about what makes lives meaningful or how to live ethically. We have some really great courses on ethics, on moral philosophy. What is the right thing to do? On justice, right? Or questions about the mind. So at Carleton, our philosophy department has a lot of connections to the cognitive science department. Or questions about knowledge. How can we know anything at all? So sometimes people think about philosophy in this way, not as a set of figures, but a set of questions. And then we could look at different people's answers to those questions. And some people think about philosophy as being a kind of practice, a way of life. So philosophy is not just a set of questions, it's not just a bunch of figures in history, but it has to do with every day, with the way you live your life, with the way you approach life, with the way you find meaning in life, the way you act with other people, the kinds of critical questions you ask, right? So philosophy is a set of practices. And sometimes as specifically a set of practices to do with applied critical thinking. So critical thinking, that's for many people the core of philosophy, thinking critically about, asking questions about one's life and the various questions that we were asking before that I mentioned before. So if you think about one's life as being made meaningful through kind of critical engagement with the world, that's a thought about philosophy as a practice, maybe as applied critical thinking. So I see a couple of questions also in the Q&A. One person asking if it's going to be recorded. That looks like it's been answered. Another question about whether Plato or Socrates is the best philosopher. So this is not a question I'm going to try to answer in this presentation, but what I will say is that we have courses on ancient philosophy in which you will read a lot of Plato and so get some real familiarity with Plato and Socrates. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about philosophy as it's been done historically, because sometimes philosophy seems to people to be really abstract and really far removed from life, which I think maybe we should rethink, especially if we're thinking about philosophy as a way of life. But anyways, I like to bring in this image. This is actually an image from the 17th century. It's from a 17th century textbook. And it's an image of the universe, actually, from a 17th century science textbook. And I don't know if you can see the image very well, but what you have in this image is the Earth at the center, and then the moon orbiting around it, and then a number of the planets orbiting around those, and then the sun and Mars and so forth. So this is what we call a geocentric universe, right? The Earth is at the center and everything is revolving around the Earth. And there was a philosopher in the 17th century named Descartes. And some of you may have heard of Descartes. And Descartes was in school and would have seen many images like this. This is the kind of vision of the universe that he would have been taught in school. But also in the late 16th century and 17th century, as some of you know, there was what we sometimes call the scientific revolution. So at the same time that Descartes is learning this stuff in school, he also knows about people like Copernicus and Galileo. And Copernicus and Galileo, among others, radically revised this vision of the universe. So they pointed out, for example, that it was more plausible that the universe is actually heliocentric and that that the sun is at the center, or at least for our solar system, and that perhaps the orbits were not circular, and that perhaps not everything revolved around the Earth. So Galileo, as some of you know, pointed out that there were moons orbiting Jupiter, which means that not everything is revolving around the Earth. So why am I giving you this quick little history of science lesson? I want you to imagine for a moment that you're Descartes, you're sitting in school, you're learning one thing, and you know that the scientists, the working scientists, are saying something totally different. How would you feel about your education? How would you feel about authority? How would you feel about the state of knowledge? So Descartes reacts to this with a deep suspicion, with a deep doubt. He gets really worried about the basis for our knowing anything at all. It's a kind of what we might call an epistemic crisis. So when I say epistemic, that has to do with knowledge. And he's in a crisis because he does not know who to believe or what to believe. And he thinks what we need to do is rebuild from the bottom up. We've got to figure out how to get science, how to get knowledge on a firm footing because there's a crisis. Okay, so that's in the 17th century. Now here is a picture of, does anyone know who these folks are? I don't see any answers. This is a picture of 50 Cent, and I think it's Ice Cube. Yes, it says 50 Cent Ice Cube. And what's interesting about this picture is they're both wearing Trump hats, right? So what you might infer from this picture is that they are Trump supporters. Nothing wrong with that. So if you make that inference, then now you have a belief. Your belief is that these two rappers supported Trump in the election. The problem is that although that image was circulated around the time of the 2020 election in the United States, it was photoshopped. It wasn't a real image. So as you can see, the real image is here on the right-hand side. So we're living in a time when a lot of people, it's the information age, right? Descartes in the 17th century, he was living through the scientific revolution. We're living through a kind of revolution too, a revolution about information and the way that information is transmitted to one another. And it turns out that it's really easy to fool people on the internet. And this, you might think, can lead us to a kind of crisis, a kind of epistemic crisis like the one that Descartes was going through. How do you know who to trust? How do you know what information is reliable? How do you know that you know anything at all? Who do you believe? Right? Do you believe your teachers? Do you believe scientists? Do you believe your own eyes? Right? Your own eyes are telling you one thing. So it's a real crisis, I think, in trying to put knowledge back on a firm footing, trying to know what you can know. And these are the kinds of questions that philosophers care about. In fact, at Carleton, we have a class called Truth and Propaganda, where we ask ourselves questions about what propaganda is and how you know what's true and who you can believe. We have a course on philosophy of technology and on information ethics, asking about algorithms and the way in which algorithms can distort our understanding of the world and can reinforce our cognitive biases. We also have a course that we offer pretty much every single semester called Critical Thinking. And our critical thinking course gets a lot of students taking it, including a lot of non-philosophy majors, because of just how important critical thinking is in getting through the world. Okay, so I have something else to share with you, which is on a different topic. So this is a different philosophical topic. So far we're just talking about knowledge and approaching the world and critical thinking, but here's a little clip from a television show that some of you may have watched called The Good Place. And let me just mention, actually, The Good Place had philosophy professors as consultants. So let me play the clip for you all.
Feel like you're engaging with the material, like with the trolley problem. That was just tricky, that's all. Why don't you just tell me the right answer? Well, that's what's so great about the trolley problem is that there is no right answer. This is why everyone hates moral philosophy professors.
I'm on your side here, dude, but he is not wrong.
Okay, Michael, trust me. When it comes to human ethics, on this track and one over there. Here are the levers to switch the tracks. Take choice. The thing is, ethically speaking, no time to make a decision. Well, it's tricky. On the one hand, if you ascribe to a purely utilitarian worldview.
All right, that's probably enough of that. You can find that clip on your own, I'm sure, and watch it. The show is terrific. So the trolley problem is a problem in moral philosophy about what the right thing to do is. Should you allow one person to die to save five, for example? And you saw an illustration of that just now on this show. But it's not an abstract problem. It's actually a problem about how we live our lives every day, in the sense that we are often confronted with ethical dilemmas. What is the right thing to do? Should we save one person if it means that there may be problems saving others? And it's a real life problem. For example, in bioethics, you can think about the way in which the present situation with the pandemic has forced us to think about healthcare in Canada and the way that we distribute our healthcare resources. So we only have so many ventilators. We only have so many emergency room beds. We only have so many ICU beds. And there are genuine and serious ethical questions about how healthcare should be distributed, which come out of thinking about things like the trolley problem. Do you kill one person to save five? So we actually have a great class on bioethics at Carleton. Oh, sorry. So let me use that to segue a little bit into talking about our department, into talking about some of our professors. We have about 12 full-time faculty members right now in the department. That changes a little bit on a year-to-year basis. Sometimes we have a little bit fewer, sometimes we have a little bit more, but it's a mid-sized department. So we're not huge. And what's nice about that is that we really get to know our students, and our students really get to know us. So philosophy classes themselves aren't huge classes, especially at the upper level. And our students have a pretty tight-knit community. So I'll talk about their community in just a moment. Let me first talk just a little bit more about the faculty interests. We have, I think I mentioned before, some deep connections with the Institute for Cognitive Science. So a number of our faculty members are actually cross-appointed in the Institute for Cognitive Science. So folks who think about the mind and who think about the relationship of the mind to the world, those are philosophers, but those questions are also relevant to people who care about cognitive science. We have folks who work in the history of philosophy. We have folks who work in political and moral philosophy. We have a bioethicist in our department who's very interested in questions about resource distribution, like the one I talked about a little bit earlier about healthcare. In addition, a lot of us have a whole bunch of non-traditional interests. So we have philosophers in our department who work on Buddhist ethics. We have philosophers in our department who work on philosophy of economics, if that's an interest. We have philosophers who work on philosophy specifically as a way of life, so philosophy as therapy. And we have some philosophers who work on philosophy with children. So we have lots of different interests in the department. Our class sizes, as I mentioned earlier, tend to be reasonably small, but it will depend on the level that you're taking them at. So our first year level classes tend to be much bigger, and our fourth year level classes tend to be the smallest, right? That tends to be the usual way that things go. A philosophy seminar, fourth year class might, for example, just have 12 people in it, 12 students. A first year class might have over 100, depending on which first year class we're talking about. So it's very, very dependent. If you have any questions about that, I'm happy to answer them as well. In terms of the actual degrees that we offer, we do have an honors degree in philosophy as well as joint honors degrees in philosophy. So a number of our students actually prefer the joint honors because they find that philosophy goes very well as an accompaniment to another degree that they enjoy taking. So we do have just majors in philosophy, but a lot of our students have a joint major with for example, with an English degree as their second major, or with a political science degree. The combination of political science and philosophy goes very well together. History and philosophy go very well together. We have a lot of humanities students who also are doing a philosophy degree, and so on and so on and so on. So I've seen all kinds of, as I said before, I'm the undergraduate supervisor. I've been undergraduate supervisor for quite a while, and while I've been undergraduate supervisor, I've seen all kinds of combinations. I've had computer science students who have taken a minor in philosophy, physics students who have taken a minor in philosophy, and so on and so forth. We have a 3-year degree as well as I said, the minor in philosophy. I mentioned already a class that we teach on critical thinking. That would be something that we offer every semester, and that is very popular among our non-philosophy majors. If you can imagine, if you're interested, for example, in journalism, critical thinking is critical for you. If you're interested in computer science, critical thinking is going to be really important. If you're interested in psychology, I mean, for any degree that you take, a critical thinking class might very well be really important for you as you get through that degree. But we also just have a bunch of really neat classes that you might want to take out of pure interest. So if you think about philosophy as a way of life, or philosophy as thinking about meaningfulness in life, I mentioned right at the beginning, we've got a class on that. We have this class called The Meaning of Life. We also just recently this year started a new class called Happiness, Well-Being, and the Good Life, which has so far this year been very popular, so we hope to offer it quite often. We offer courses called first year seminars. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the first year seminars at Carleton, but I highly recommend that you look into them, because first year seminars are first year courses that are run like seminars. And what's great about them is that most first year classes are pretty big, but first year seminars are capped at about 30 students. So you're guaranteed to have a really small group of students who are all working together. You get to know them really well, and it's restricted to first year students. So the only students who can take these first year seminars are students in their first year at Carleton. So it's a great way to meet your cohort, to have a small class, and to approach some really interesting material. So some of the first year seminars that we've offered in the past couple of years. So in 2020, we had a really cool class called Fake News, Fad Diets, and Flat Earthers, Knowledge and Ignorance in the Social World. And that course actually dealt with a lot of the kinds of concerns I talked about earlier, in terms of like, how do you know anything? Who do you trust? What's a reliable source of information? Who's an expert, right? And so on. Actually, this past year, we had a first year seminar. So in the fall, in 2021 fall, we ran a first year seminar called Science Fiction and Philosophy, which was a really cool one. I think that they went to see Dune together. That was one of their field trips. Dune's got lots of really cool philosophical themes. So these are some of the courses we offer. We also have a course on pop culture and philosophy, which is fun, as well as some more standard philosophy courses. So we offer courses consistently on, for example, logic. We offer courses on the history of philosophy. We offer courses on political philosophy, questions about justice. A course that I mentioned earlier called bioethics is a very, very well-attended course of ours. We have courses on environmental ethics and so on. So my belief is that for any major that you're in, whether it's a philosophy major or not, there will be some philosophy courses that will be relevant to your degree. So let's talk a little bit about what you can do with a philosophy degree, because some of you may be concerned about this. I will say it's a little bit early. You're just starting. You have some time to figure this out. But we all think about practical issues. We are all thinking about turning our minds towards the future, thinking about what we can do. And a philosophy degree in particular strikes some people as not being very practical, right? A lot of people joke about the philosophy degree that it's not a very practical degree. But when I think about a philosophy degree, I actually ask a more general question to myself, which is, what is an arts degree or a humanities degree for in general? Or why would you take a humanities class or an arts class in general? And in my view, the answer is not about a specific career path, but rather about a set of skills that you gain from doing an arts program or a humanities program or taking a humanities class. And the kinds of skills that our philosophy students acquire are really, I think, skills that can then be flexible and used in any number of different careers. In fact, in many ways, what philosophy does is rather than narrowing down your careers, is open up a whole bunch of possible options for you. So the kinds of skills that you're going to develop through a philosophy degree or in a philosophy class are going to be skills in critical analysis, skills in communication, writing skills, oral communication skills, the kinds of things that really can be parlayed in many different directions. And so perhaps to illustrate this, I thought I could bring in some pictures of people who have philosophy degrees. So these are not Carleton grads, but it may interest you to know that the former Chief Justice of Canada has a philosophy degree. In fact, philosophy is a very good accompanier to law. Many of our students are interested ultimately in doing law degrees because of what I said before, namely that the precise skills that you get from philosophy are really great in a career in law. But also, if you're not interested in law, but maybe interested in something else, I don't know what Elmo's degree was in, but Ricky Gervais has a philosophy degree. So he's an entertainer. A lot of comedians actually have philosophy degrees. I believe that Conan O'Brien has a philosophy degree as well, as does the creator of The Simpsons, I believe, Matt Groening. So a number of entertainers. May interest you to know also that the former Prime Minister of Canada, Paul Martin, has a degree in philosophy, as does Angela Davis, who some of you may know, political activist and scholar. So these are people from a wide variety of disciplines, areas, interests, all of whom have philosophy degrees. In terms of specific Carleton grads, you may be interested to know that we include Giller Prize winners and Federal Court of Canada justices as our alumni. So Lynn Cody, the novelist, came out of a Carleton philosophy program, as did Susan Bordeaux, a feminist philosopher and psychologist or psychoanalyst, and Russell Zinn, who's a justice or was a justice on the Federal Court of Canada. So I mentioned law. A lot of students who take philosophy, as I say, are interested in pursuing law. There's a really tight fit there because of the critical analysis skills that you get. And as it turns out, philosophy students also do really, really well on the LSAT. So this is some data from 2008, 2009. There is more recent data, but the more recent data shows roughly the same thing, which is that philosophy students tend to come in second on the LSAT only to physics and math majors. So as you see, surpassing many of the other disciplines that you might have thought were also good preparation for a law degree. And in fact, philosophy students tend to do very well on these kinds of standardized tests that are entry tests for other degrees in general. Sorry, here's some more recent data for the LSAT. You can see that philosophy is still roughly at the top here, tied roughly with economics, and this is from 2014. The GRE, that's the graduate record exam. So if you want to do graduate work, so generally speaking a PhD, but sometimes also MAs, a lot of programs will ask you to write something called the GRE. And as you can see from this chart, when we're looking at the GRE, what you see is that philosophy majors tend to score very well on the analytical writing in the verbal reasoning sections of the GRE, which is again the sorts of skills I was talking about earlier. They do slightly worse on the quantitative reasoning sections. So on the GRE, there's a bunch of quantitative reasoning, usually through geometry. But as you'll see, even there, philosophy students tend to do quite respectably. And the departments that do better than the philosophy students are ones that are quantitative departments. So it shouldn't surprise us that they do better. So philosophy students do excellently on the GRE. In 2015 to 18, you see again the same, it's very consistent data showing that philosophy students come first in the analytical writing and verbal reasoning sections of the GRE, and then beat out pretty much all the other humanities disciplines on the quantitative reasoning section as well. So what can you do with a degree in philosophy? I've said you could do almost anything. What have our students done with degrees in philosophy? Well, some of them have gone on to do further work in philosophy. So we actually have students who have gone, we do have a Carleton MA in philosophy, but we've got students who have gone on to do graduate work at Oxford, at Brown, at the University of Chicago, at the University of Toronto. So we have students doing PhDs there right now, as well as many who've done them in the past. We have our own PhD program, which is called the EPAF program, Ethics and Political Affairs. It's not exactly a philosophy PhD, but it's housed in our department. We also have students who have gone on to do graduate work in other fields of arts and social sciences. For example, art history, political science, political theory, communication. So we have had a number of students go on to do further graduate work. In addition to the kind of academic future graduate work that some of our students have done, some of them have also done more other kinds of post BA degrees that are less academic and more, could we say, like aimed at a particular career. So for example, a lot of our students, if they get very interested in environmental ethics or in bioethics, might get interested in doing a master's in public health or in public policy. So that's the MPH, MPA. We do have students indeed who have gone on to do masters in business administration as well, and library sciences. So if you get very good and you really love to do analysis, then information science might be a great place for you. In Ontario, in addition, philosophy is a teachable in high schools, which means that you can become a high school teacher who teaches philosophy. So some of our philosophy students have gone on and become high school teachers. And I mentioned before law school as well. So these are all degrees that you can do, what we might call postgraduate degrees that are not necessarily academic postgraduate degrees like PhDs. We do also have students who don't want to do another degree, right? Who want to go right into a career, and philosophy does prepare you for that. So the kinds of skills that our students have make them ideal candidates for doing work in ethics and policy analysis, right? So and Ottawa, of course, is a government town, so it's a great place to be doing that kind of work. In addition, a number of our students have been very interested in doing non-governmental work. So sometimes human rights-based work, sometimes political philosophy-based work, sometimes nonprofit work, right? So our students have gone on to do some very interesting stuff using their Carleton philosophy degree. So having said all of that, I've given you, I hope, a little bit of a sense of what we do in a philosophy department and what the Carleton philosophy department is like. And so I thought I'd open it up to any questions that you might have. And also what I did is I put up my email address here with the thought that if you had questions but didn't want to ask them now, you could always just send them to me by email. So does anybody have any questions? So Mark is asking a question, is it possible to have a degree in history with a double minor in philosophy and religious studies? What an interesting question. So my sense is that this should be possible. What you'll want to look at is the different credit allocations. So if you're doing a 4-year degree at Carleton, a 4-year degree is a 20 credit program. Of those 20 credits, they get distributed in various ways between your major and your minor. So a minor is usually a 4-credit program. So each credit is either a full year course or one semester course is a half a credit at Carleton. So 4 credits could be 8 half-year courses, 4 full-year courses, or some combination thereof. So the minor tends to be 4 credits. So if you're talking about 2 minors, that's 8 credits. Out of a 20 credit degree, that leaves you with 12 credits. Typically, your major would be about, depending again if you're doing a major, a double major, whatever, but a major is usually 10 credits. So can you do that, Mark? Absolutely. What happens is that you have less room after that for electives. The people to really speak to you about that might be people in admissions, who I know are standing by and who have a really good sense of all the different like credit allocations and stuff like that for the degree. So somebody asked Mia asking about, I'm sorry, I don't know if it's pronounced Mia or Maya, asking about minoring in philosophy with a Bachelor of Journalism and Humanities. So journalism and humanities and philosophy. So here's the nice thing about philosophy and humanities at Carleton. So we do have a lot of connections with one another. Of course, in humanities, in the humanities department, the humanities degree, they take philosophy very seriously, and they have a number of philosophers working there. Some of the courses that you would take as part of your degree in humanities count for credit in philosophy. So that would actually make it a little bit easier to combine philosophy with a humanities degree. So I'll give you an example, the Humanities 2000 course, which is the big course that all humanities students have to take in their second year, that can be counted towards philosophy credit at Carleton. And if you have a 4-credit minor, and that's a full year course, that's only 3 credits left after that to complete in the minor. So there's a lot of different permutations that are possible. As I said to Mark, probably the people who could best answer those questions would be people in admissions. And also you need to think about for your own self, what makes the most sense for you. If you already have a serious interest in philosophy, then it might make a lot of sense for you to take a whole bunch of courses in philosophy, enough so that it's going to count as a minor. Right? If you just think, hey, I'm interested, but I don't know, right? You can always take 1 course, 2 courses, see how you feel. And then, the more you take, the more you enjoy it, you can always switch into the minor afterwards as well. So FAST, the Faculty of Arts and Social Science, makes it very easy for you to add minors onto a program. So I see also that Molly in the Q&A is saying how to connect to admissions staff, which is great. Does anybody want to ask about some of our courses in philosophy? So I recommend to everybody to take our critical thinking course. I think that probably came out in the presentation a little bit. I think our critical thinking course is terrific. But I also recommend to everybody a few others of our courses. So if you're coming into your first year at Carleton, I strongly recommend taking one of, by the way, that critical thinking course, it's a second year course, but it is open to first year students. But if you're coming into your first year at Carleton, you're just thinking about picking up an elective, we have a couple of really cool first year philosophy courses. So I already mentioned the Meaning in Life course. We also have a course called Philosophy of Love and Sex, which is a really interesting course. And we have a course on sort of introductory ethics, which has also been very, very popular with students because we've had some great instructors for that course who've asked some really interesting ethical questions, really relevant and interesting ones. In recent years, there's been a lot of focus on applied ethics and thinking specifically about how ethical decisions are part of our everyday lives. So highly recommend some of our first year courses if you're just thinking about picking up a single class. Does anybody have any questions about Carleton or about Ottawa? Are most philosophy courses half 0.5 credits or full year credits, Mark wants to know. So that's a really great question. At Carleton in general, in the Faculty of Arts and Social Science, most classes are half a credit. So most courses are 1 semester long, which is a half a credit. There are always a few full year courses, but not a lot of them actually, because full year courses sometimes can make it difficult for students to schedule things. So we try to make it as flexible as possible for students to take our courses. And if you take a full year course, then that's the time, then you're taking a course at that time every week for the full year, which can make it which can make it difficult to schedule other courses. So we do have some full year courses, but I would say that the vast majority of our courses, and probably in FAST more generally, are half credit courses. All the ones I've mentioned, I think, are half credit courses. Our first year seminars used to be full year courses, but they've been turned into half year courses. I would also recommend that you take a look at the first year seminar course offerings in general at Carleton. There should be, I don't have a link to this in my presentation, but if you go to the Carleton website and you search for FYSM, which is the course code for first year seminars, or even if you just search for first year seminars, you should get a website that pops up with all the first year seminars that have been taught in the past year. And that'll give you a sense of what we offer. And I think that, I recommend to all students coming into Carleton to at least look into taking one of those courses. I think they're a great way to start off your time at Carleton. Oh, and there's Molly putting in the link to that. Thank you so much, Molly. Yeah, highly recommend looking into that. Anybody want to ask about course sizes or living in Ottawa? So I will hang out here for a few more minutes. I'm happy to answer any questions anybody might have. You have my email address, as I said, it's right up there. Please feel free to email me. I'm glad to take your emails. But otherwise, I think Molly might be here to wrap things up.
I am indeed. We can hang on for a couple more minutes and see if there's any more last minute questions coming through. But I'll just second the thank you. Thank you for coming and spending the last 45 minutes with us. It does look like we have one more question here.
And Molly, I think there's a booth for philosophy as well, right?
There is, yes.
So I'll go hang out in that booth for about half an hour after this. So if you have any questions, you can always go there as well. So Mia wanting to know, do you get to do lots of writing in philosophy classes? That depends a lot on which philosophy class you're going to take. So in a class, for example, on the meaning of life, you'd probably have a lot of essays that you'd be writing. But in a class on critical thinking, you might be doing fewer essays and doing more problem-based discussion. So problem-based analysis, shorter answer kinds of issues, right? You'd be looking at, usually in a critical thinking class, you'd be looking at specific examples of arguments that have been given by people and doing some analysis of those. So that would be less, there would still be writing involved, but it would be a less writing-based class. So it's very, very dependent on the class. Okay.
All right, awesome. Thank you again, Mia and Mark. We will, if you've got any other questions, feel free to head into one of the booths. There's also booths for all of our programs and services as well. So check any of those out.
Yeah, so thank you all for attending.